Over the past couple of years, inflation has been a really big issue for the modern day Australian due to the high amounts of price increases in most goods and services throughout the country. The annual CPI, the Consumer Price Index, shows that inflation was 3.6% in the March 2024 quarter, lower than the 4.1% annual raise in the previous quarter. This marks the fifth consecutive quarter with a lower annual inflation rate since the peak of 7.8% in the December 2022 quarter, trimming the annual inflation of 4%, which also is lower than the March quarter compared to the previous quarter of 4.2% and the peak in December 2022 of 6.8%. Inflation is coming down, but it's still extremely high. It will still take some time before it comes down to the RBM's, the Reserve Bank of Australia's target range. Inflation is expected to decline to be in the RBM's range of 2 to 3% in the year 2025 and reach the midpoint of 2.5% in the year 2026. Australia is a massive country and considered one of the richest in the world due to its incredibly large mining sector, which is doing great due to the world's fuel shortage on petroleum, gas, and coal. Having over 10% of the world's coal reserves, having the third highest coal reserves in the world, beating out countries like India and China and those pesky Brits. They're not even in the top 10. Those bottle of water colonizer willing to fight you and kill you over some musty spices from India are people. That wasn't a joke. Britain colonized and killed millions of Indians over some spicy chicken. And they still don't know how to add flavor to their meals. I mean, look at this. Okay, I'm getting off topic. Australia has the largest iron ore reserves in the world, with over 50 billion metric tons, but instead of using it for their own factories, they decide to sell it to China, which creates steel out of it, which actually creates them more economic benefit instead of us. And Australia's natural gas reserves is kind of lacking, because look at this chart. Zoom in to the bottom. Australia holds the 27th position in the world in natural gas reserves. With these factors, it means that Australia heavily relies on exports to make its income. So when a sickness which came from a Chinese man chomping on a bat and caused the whole world to close their borders and cut off all exports and imports in fear of letting in the virus. In defense of its people, Australia closed its borders since 2020 till it opened them back up in 2022, which means for 2 years Australia was cut dry of its export market, creating a future financial issue, due to the Australian government having to print money to make up for the loss. The issue of inflation in Australia has occurred due to many different problems from the past few years. The Ukraine-Russian conflict, which started in 2022 and seems to have no end in sight due to the determination and sanctions placed on the Russian government and its people, which debatably has done nothing but create a massive fuel shortage worldwide, causing even more inflation due to the price of the fuel going up, which lots of companies need to manufacture their products, meaning the extended rate of goods and services provided is increased due to the more expensive manufacturing needed for such products. And another major issue that created heavy inflation throughout Australia took place of the COVID period of 2020 to 2023. This issue arose due to the Australian government having to print out money to stop economic stagnation. In 2021 and 2022, the Reserve Bank of Australia had drawn down the stock of the previous issued banknotes during the COVID-19 pandemic. Almost all of the issuance by the Reserve Bank of Australia in the 2020-2021 era, they had printed around $74 million in care packages and tried to get people to go out and spend their money so there was more economic activity. But most people opted to hold on to the money they made during the COVID times. So after the COVID times, there was a massive amount of new money flooding into the economy, with brand new bills without creating any more financial value. So this caused prices to shoot up considerably due to the amount of new money created out of practically nothing, lowering the bill's value considerably. Another major issue for Australian inflation is that Australia has one of the worst housing crises in the world. Even though Australia has a massive land area, it only truly has a few big financial and population centres. Australia has 5 major cities, which are Sydney, Melbourne, Perth and Adelaide, all of which are huddled together to the eastern coast, making Perth the most isolated major city on Earth. So you really don't want to know what's going on there, as there are more and more people coming into these packed cities where the housing market cannot expand, forces them to buy into the expensive Australian housing market, making the prices of the houses rise even more, creating more housing inflation. And the Australian tax code forces Australians to get addicted to buying more and more into housing. It's something called negative gearing. It means when you buy a house or a land good, if it goes down in value, you can cut it off your tax bill. About 20% of Australians have an extra property investment. Rich guys, I respect it. They just want to make some money. But this also further narrows the housing market, creating even higher prices, making Perth the most affordable major city in Australia. But it's also not a good thing, due to Perth being the 20th most expensive city in the world, while the other cities placed in top 10 most expensive in the world, making a monopoly for the rich on the Australian housing market. Home ownership data from 2021 shows that home ownership rate of 67% is down from the 2006 data of 70%. Other than all these issues, Australia has not had a recession in over 30 years. A recession is when a country's GDP goes down, which could cause mass unemployment and huge financial crisis for the country in short. But Australia seems to have a very prosperous future ahead of itself, because many developing countries in Asia are willing to eat up its resources, creating more financial opportunities in the country. And after COVID-19 times, inflation seems to go down, but not at the rate the Reserve Bank needs. But Australia's inflation crisis seems to only get worse every year because of these issues. But no one can predict the future, least of all someone doing this for a school project.